Hey, welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. Today we're in Revelation chapter 6, where the Lamb of God opens the unopenable scroll. And when he does, mayhem is unleashed on the earth. There's these 4 horsemen, the apocalyptic horse riders who go out and devastations on the earth, and under the altar of God, the martyrs are lamenting, how long is this going to go on, Lord? How long till you're going to deal with evil? And there's great earthquakes and signs in the heavens. And this is the kind of stuff that we usually associate with the book of Revelation. We've gone patiently through 5 chapters now and learned some new things, but this content from here going forward is kind of the stuff that we usually think of when we think of the book of Revelation, and when Hollywood thinks of post-apocalyptic movies and so forth. So, Destiny, looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, do you have any opening thoughts or questions, reflections about it?
Yeah, I'm curious. Can you link us back to chapter 5, just so that there's not a huge space between where we're at mentally here in chapter 6 and what was just occurring in our last conversation?
Yeah, so that question right there, step 1 to good Bible reading, because the fastest way to misread the Bible is to forget the context and to absolutize something that is actually situated by surrounding things. So several things connect what we're about to study today in Revelation 6 with what has just gone before in chapter 5. Chapters 4 and 5 were the great throne room scene. All of creation is around the throne of God and worshiping the one seated there. And that's chapter 4. Then in chapter 5, some wrinkles come in. First of all, there's a scroll that is produced that nobody can read. And John breaks out into tears because this scroll has something like God's salvation plan, but it's inaccessible. And then someone says, "Don't cry. The lion can read it." And John turns around and he sees a slaughtered sheep, but that's still alive. And the slaughtered alive sheep jumps up on the throne and gets the scroll and can read it. And so, and it has 7 seals on it, which were signaled the authenticity of the document. It hasn't been tampered with. You know, it's like a sealed envelope kind of thing. And so in chapter 6, what is carried forward is the Lamb is opening the seals on the scroll. And now we're going to start to see what happens when that document is opened. Yeah, so that's the connector.
Okay. So in the beginning of chapter 6, there are some pretty key players with these 4 horsemen.
Yeah.
And I know for a lot of us, and you mentioned this earlier, this is the type of stuff that our brain goes to when we think of Revelation.
Totally.
And it's a little bit confusing. It's a lot of bit confusing. And one thing I'm wondering is, are these horsemen literal? Are these like actual horsemen on horses that are somewhere? Or is this like a metaphor for something that occurs maybe on a regular basis, or is just like a reality that we face in the world?
Right. So, you know, growing up in Montana, when you're hunting, some guys get these like night trail cams that they'll put on trees. So that they can see so that when the bear walks by or the deer walks by, they'll be like, "Caught you on camera." So should we set those up, because maybe the horsemen of the apocalypse will go trotting by?
I would love to meet them. No, I really would.
There goes well, I don't think it's like that.
Okay.
When we're reading Revelation, one go-to we always have to say is, have we seen this anywhere prior in the Bible? And so in this case, yes. In the book of Zechariah, twice in chapters 1 and 6, Zechariah sees kind of patrolmen on horseback who are sent by God out to patrol the world. And it's an image of God's oversight, of God's activity. God's not far in a deistic sense. God is engaged. God is here. But it is a way of speaking that isn't meant to be like, you know, keep an eye out the window. They could come by at any time. The other thing to keep in mind is that the sequence of 4 horses is also symbolic in a sense.
Oh, okay.
That is to say, a lot of end times prophecy stuff gets super into charts of like, this happens, then this, with implied causal links, because this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this. When very often these things are much more like music. Like when you play a chord on the piano, you're simultaneously playing 8 notes. When you strum something on the guitar, same sort of thing. These things are overlapped. So right now we're looking at these 7 seals. Soon we will be looking at the 7 trumpets and then the 7 bowls. There's also the 7 thunders, which are not explicated because John is specifically told, don't talk about those. There's the 7 signs. Like, as we've talked about in a prior episode, there are these nested 7s, sacred number pointing to completion. But the point here is to say, these are like different aspects of a single complex layered reality. And so to overpress it for literalism, to say, no, after the white horse comes the red, then maybe, but I think that is a pretty wooden reading of poetry and how poetry works.
So then what is that layered reality that each of these is pointing to?
Right. No, see, that's a very important question, because people tend to get, as soon as you go to this place where you're like, well, no, it's not literal, the assumption is, oh, well, you're just watering down the Bible and you don't believe it.
Sure.
But on the contrary, I deeply believe it, and the reality to which it's pointing is more serious than a guy on a horseback. It is pointing to the deep brokenness of the world, the cyclical nature of evil. We have to step back and ask ourselves this question when we get to the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And we're going to read this here shortly, and we'll go,
line by line.
Line by line. We have to ask ourselves the question, how does God heal the world in the Bible and through Jesus and through his death and resurrection? Is God's strategy to just bulldoze evil and send in AK-47 Jesus and all the tanks and just deal with it that way?
Well, and this is really helpful, and I'll let you finish, but this is a helpful point, because when we read Revelation, because there's just so much happening and there's so many images that we aren't frequently saturated in, it feels like we're in a new story. We're not in a new story. We're almost in like a retelling. I don't know how to say that. Like when we sit with Revelation, because like this is cohesive with the rest of Scripture. We've talked about this in other episodes. We are not leaving the biblical story to start a new story about how God is going to start a war and there's going to be horses and there, like this whole separate thing, or this thing that's entirely in the future, right? Or something like that.
Right.
We are engaging and hearing from John's perspective, something that is very in tune with the biblical story that is unfolding in history and has been for years.
Right. This brings us back to the very first question you asked, which is, how does this link up with what went before? Because just prior, John has heard a lion, but he's had to learn how to think of a lion in terms of a lamb.
Exactly.
To reorient his understanding of lionness.
And how would he without the death and resurrection of Jesus?
Exactly. So when we come to this passage, we can't just sort of bracket out God's suffering, self-giving love.
Yep, exactly.
And now it's kick butt Jesus time.
Right, yes.
And not to say God cannot decisively deal with evil, but it is to say, I had a friend once who told me, I'm pre-tribulation rapture, but I've got a lot of guns and ammo in case my theology's wrong. And I'm like, that's an interesting plan for one having potentially wrong theology.
Right, yeah. Yeah, just be prepared on both sides, huh?
Right. So, but this gets to the question, how does God deal with evil?
Right. How will God
heal the world? Does he ignore it? Does he just stomp it? Or, as on the cross, does he go directly into the heart of it and heal it radically from within? And so, as I was preparing for this episode, Tom Wright, as usual, has just a brilliant insight where he talks about how in many pastoral contexts, medical contexts, psychoanalytic contexts, somebody will come in to have a problem, but the first thing out of their mouth and the symptom that's bothering them isn't the real issue. The real issue is several layers deeper than that. And the only way to heal the surface level issue truly is actually to bring to light what's really going on deep down. And so, his reading of this passage is to say, we might expect that when the scroll opens, God's just going to unleash salvation and make things better.
Right.
On the contrary, they seem to get worse.
Yes, all hell breaks loose.
Why is that? And, his sort of reading is to say, because evil has to be exposed and brought to its worst to actually be dealt with fully. Here's a quote that I thought was very insightful. He said, "Revelation is, as it were, the cosmic version of the tough pastoral struggle over the deeply wounded soul. The soul of the world is aware of immediate problems and pains, but unless we look deeper to the ancient patterns of conquest, violence, oppression, and death itself, we shall not begin to understand what needs to be done if the world is to be healed, really healed, rather than merely patched together for a few more years." And so there's a sense of which, I mean, we could think of all of Revelation from chapter 6 all the way through chapter 20, when ultimate evil is finally dealt with,
right,
as an extended diagnosis of what is wrong with the world, and not just out there, also in here. And it may not be what we want to hear. We want to get, boom, right to the solution. But the Christian church's unwillingness to think about evil in a deeper way is part of the reason of the church's irrelevance. And, there's, opposite and equal sort of errors here where some churches focus entirely on, I am such a sinner and the sin in me, but we never talk about sort of social evil, structural evil. No, we don't talk about that. And then the opposite, where it's all structural, systemic evil. But
there's no personal culpability.
I'm a saint, and don't you dare, question who I sleep with and whatever. And it's like, no, you're both half right and half wrong. Both of those things go together.
Yes.
And
to truly get to the heart of the issue, you have to see the thing for what it is and deal with it at a deeper level.
Right. And this is part of why the Bible, again, is a book for adults, because there is no hastening on to the answer right away.
Yeah.
I mean, Revelation's not even a book that gives us clear answers. It's a book designed to help us pray and ponder and be faithful in waiting and in perseverance. It's not designed to be a sort of IKEA-style manual, put this, the end.
And it continues to push us past this idea that we often hold on to, that we can only hope if we have an answer, that hope relies on an answer. Hope is in a person, and that is deeply reliable.
Right.
And I just, I that really pushes me past my initial desire for, I will trust when I have the answers, which is just not how the scriptures want to pastor us into dealing with that.
Or I think it's that we trust on the basis of a different type of knowledge. I don't, the basis of faith isn't necessarily, I've now filled in all of the boxes and I fully understand everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
The ground is that I've experienced the heart of the one who knows all the answers, and I trust his heart.
That's good.
And so although there's things I don't know, that's okay because I trust the knower.
Exactly.
And so I'm okay.
Yeah. No, that's incredibly well said. Exactly. So can we get a little bit more into the weeds here?
Yeah.
And read them verse by verse?
Let's
do you have any other comments?
Yeah, let me just mention one last thing.
Yeah.
By way of swatting aside a potential misunderstanding, is that what we're about to read, 4 times the Lamb opens a seal and a horse goes off.
Right. Does
that mean that the horses are, and the rider and all the death it portends, is that the content of the scroll? And the answer is no, it's not the content of the scroll. It accompanies the opening of the seal.
Okay.
But it's not like it's not like the scroll is a big horse stable.
Yeah.
And as soon as you start opening it,
right,
the whinnying starts happening. It's not that. It accompanies it. And later,
or that the message has to do with, or that the message is these terrible things.
Right. Later in the book, we learn what the scroll says, but the process of opening the scroll is accompanied by these signs.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Shall we get into it?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Verse 1 and 2, this is the white horse. The next thing I saw was this. When the Lamb had opened one of the 7 seals, I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come." And as I watched, there was a white horse. Its rider was holding a bow. He was given a crown, and he went off, winning victories, and to win more of them.
So some have suggested, is this Jesus? Because in chapter 19, he's riding in on a white horse.
Right. Right.
But this seems not to be Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
The ancient Romans feared above all the Parthians were a people kind of almost like mythological in their mind, but they were mounted bowmen. Am I saying that right? They had mounted
archers. They rode horses and they were archers.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And so it seems to be tapping into a little bit of that fear here. And that's all I have on the white horse.
Like this. So it's supposed to evoke this feeling of fear for maybe like armies of people who can really jack you up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Is that what it's getting at?
Yes. Although I think the second horse is a little bit more affiliated with warfare and the fear of that. So I don't have a full answer on that.
That's okay.
One.
Let's keep going. Verse 3.
Yep.
When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And another horse went out, fiery red this time. Mm-hmm. Its rider was given permission to take peace away from the earth, so that the people would kill one another. He was given a great sword.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a little bit more warlike. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, part of how God judges the world is to let people destroy each other. It's not like God comes in with a comet and destroys. It's like, go ahead, self-destruct, because that's evil will self-destruct. And the color red is often associated with bloodshed, with war. Mm-hmm. In fact, this is why Mars, the red planet, is named Mars, because Mars is the Roman god of war. And so this affiliation between red and warfare certainly had resonances in that world.
Yeah, it's pulling on a common imagination, a shared imagination for that. All right, verse 5. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." As I watched, there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand. I heard something like a voice coming from the midst of the four living creatures. "A quart of wheat for a dinar," said the voice, "and 3 quarts of barley for a dinar. But don't ruin the oil and the wine."
Mm-hmm. So this is getting at economic evil, and you got to know some background stuff here, because you're like, what the heck's a dinar and what's a quart of wheat? I don't know.
Is this a lot of money for a lot or for a little food?
Is it a good deal or a bad deal?
Yeah,
it's a terrible deal. It's inflation is skyrocketing. We don't know anything about that in America. But basically, the wheat and the barley, those are commodities for poor people. Those are just staples, and they're shooting way up.
Yeah.
But the oil and the wine, those are the sort of luxury items for the rich, and they stay the same. And so it's sort of, this idea of the rich become richer at the expense of the poor. And that's something that goes back a very long time in history. In fact, the book of Revelation has a very, very strong economic critique of the Roman Empire. And this is towards the beginning of it. I think it's chapter 18 that has like just a pretty sustained, intense breakdown of economic injustice.
Wow. Yes.
And of course, many of the wars in history are ultimately fighting over finite resources and who's going to live on that peninsula and who's going to have access to those wheat fields and that
the oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So the economic aspect of evil ties in very much to other types of evil.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So verse 7, when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." As I looked, there was a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death. Hades followed along behind him. They were given authority over a quarter of the earth, to kill with the sword and with famine and with death and by means of the earth's wild animals.
Yeah, and some of these types of death would have been very familiar to the first readers of Revelation, with the persecutions by animals or whatever. And so this is describing many things that I think they would recognize in their own world. And none of these are super detailed. We might want to go in deeper. How did this happen? But the book of Revelation is like standing on the side of a highway and watching cars go by at like 80 miles an hour and looking in the window at an 80 mile an hour moving car. You can't see it very clearly. It gives you these rapid snapshots. But what they are, these four horsemen together are pointing at the trajectory of humanity towards greed, towards murder, towards injustice, towards chaos, things like that. That's what's going on, I think.
What are these? Are these warnings? Hey, this is going to happen to you?
Yeah.
Or are these warnings in the sense of, here's God's judgment on you?
Yeah.
Or is this just strictly commentary? Like, here's what's happening in the world.
Right.
It sucks.
Right. Right.
What is this?
Yeah. So my best understanding is that it's simultaneously a judgment and a warning of further judgment. To say like, hey,
okay,
this is bad. It could get worse. You probably should repent. But we'll learn people don't repent. People are often unresponsive to God. But it's also like what we were talking about earlier, God allowing evil to be brought out into the full, to be fully exposed, to be dealt with. Now, again, my understanding here, and there's things about the book of Revelation I don't fully understand, but my understanding is that two things are true. One thing that's true is that these types of evils have existed in every generation. And so every generation has, I mean, if you look at a book about the history of interpretation of Revelation, almost every generation has said, oh my God, it's written about our time.
Right. It's us.
And in a sense, they've all been right, not wrong, because these things are cyclical. But I think there's also a sense in which there will be a time that is sort of the final time. These series of sevens, I don't think I said this earlier, with the 7 trumpets and bowls and seals and all this stuff. The 7th, the 6th and 7th in each of those cycles portray the end from a different vantage, but they're all portraying the end. So even though from a biblical standpoint at a small level, history is looped, there are recurrences in history, ultimately it is linear. So it's actually sometimes it's best to think of like,
going somewhere.
You could think of it like a spiral, because a spiral is simultaneously circular and linear. So it is going somewhere. There will be a terminus. And so I think what I don't want to do is symbologize this away. That's probably not a word, but like be like,
sure.
yes, it's just pointing to the world as it always was. But then what you're doing is taking the teeth out of any sense in which God interacts in a definitive manner in history. No, he does, and he will.
Yep.
And so, but if you overemphasize that and you double down on a sort of literalism, you're missing a ton of the music. And so that, you know, trying to balance these sorts of things is, I think, part of the beautiful challenge of reading this book.
Yep. No, and I think you did that well. I think you did that well with that explanation. So thank you. As we move into verse 9, things are going to shift a little bit. We're going to see some new pictures and some new characters. And so do you mind if I read that?
Let's do it. Verses 9 through 11.
Yeah, we can kind of dive into what those mean.
Okay.
When the Lamb opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been killed because of the word of God and because of the witness which they had borne. They shouted at the tops of their voices, "Holy and true Master," they called. "How much longer are you going to put off giving judgment and avenging our blood on the earth dwellers?" Each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to rest for a little while yet, until the full number of those to be killed, as they had been, was reached, including both their fellow servants and their kinsfolk.
Yeah, so no more horses. And in fact, the 5th and 6th seal are in many ways like a response to the first 4 seals. And here's these martyrs who are saying, this is intolerable. God, how much longer till you fix this? What's interesting about that is this is one of maybe the only place in the New Testament where it describes with some detail what the souls of the faithful Christian dead are doing in God's presence. And what's fascinating is they're lamenting.
Yep.
They're not rejoicing and saying, gosh, I love being in heaven. It's actually angst.
Yep.
That's a mind bender for me, because they're still saying, not in a sort of spiteful vengeance, get them back, those people who are mean to us, but sharing God's own concern for the world out of joint, out of balance, defaced, and saying, when are we going to fix this? I think part of also probably, it seems what they're yearning for is bodies. Like, you know, the idea of when we go to heaven, when our soul, God willing, after death is in God's space in heaven, that's not the end of the story.
Right.
The ultimate end game is new heavens, new earth, new creation. including new bodies. And so it's interesting to see these souls restless.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? What is that?
Well, it tracks with, especially the studies that I've been doing. Tom Wright, I know we sing his praises here, but it's because he's done some really incredible work here. His Surprised by Hope. It's a book title, Surprised by Hope. And he kind of walks us through like misconceptions that Christians have about the afterlife and things like that. And as I've wrestled with trying to understand, okay, well, what does happen after death? And is heaven kind of the final destination in the sense of like, I go away and I'm a part of this big worship service in heaven and we just are all praising God for forever. Yay, you know? And that's kind of it. Seeing this kind of as the first stop in a multi-stage situation where when someone dies and is in God and then is then in God's care and like there's space. We don't know what exactly that looks like. This seems to be a small picture potentially into what that could look like for some. And then eventually to the full restoration of creation and God remaking the world. And anyways, this is just, it maps onto that a little bit better than the, woo, we're going to heaven, and that's where it ends, you know? And there's nothing to say about new creation or whatever Revelation is talking about with that new Jerusalem. Maybe that's a separate thing, and maybe that's hope too, but this is a more cohesive story with that. Does that make sense? So I think this fits well within that theology.
Yeah, good. I do too. By the way, if anybody's interested in the book she mentioned, it's fantastic. Surprised by Hope, subtitle, Rethinking Heaven, Resurrection, and the Mission of the Church. That book is actually for him sort of a popularized rewrite of a major scholarly book called The Resurrection of the Son of God. And it's the third volume in a series called Christian Origins and the Question of God. And that's really the sort of like heavily footnoted back-end version. But you know, the belief in the resurrection of the body has, for many, it's sort of an embarrassment or a marginalized, like, do we really believe that?
It's just neglected to talk about as well. We really don't cover it very frequently.
Right. And we come to Easter services and we talk about the cross and with a vague happy ending, but we don't, anyways, that's a whole nother topic, but coming to terms with God's commitment to materiality is a really important part of being Christian, because otherwise, why should we invest in beauty and in justice and in caring for the earth or anything? Why should we do that? It doesn't matter. God doesn't even like matter. God is anti-atom.
Yeah, sure.
ATOM. But no, God actually loves ADAM and ATOM.
He loves the material world that he created.
Indeed.
In the first place.
Indeed.
Yes,
Indeed.
absolutely.
And the resurrection of Jesus is a profound vindication of that. So when we see these souls in heaven, restless, maybe that's part of why they're restless.
Yeah.
So this isn't how I'm supposed to be.
I think it tracks.
Yeah.
I think it tracks. And I think it also tracks that that's not the final destination, that God will eventually heal all of creation.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know why these martyrs are under an altar.
Yeah.
Right?
So we learn, and we'll learn this more explicitly a couple chapters on, I think, maybe even chapter 7, that the throne room of God is also like a temple. And of course, at the very end of the book, the New Jerusalem doesn't have a formal temple because God's presence is all in all and all this stuff. But when you go back to the Old Testament tabernacle temple, the book of Leviticus, the blood of sacrifices are thrown at the base of the altar. And so it seems to be sort of in that thought world where the martyrs, it's not just any old faithful Christian who died. It's the martyrs whose blood has been spilled. They're at the base of the altar. And so this seems to sort of track with this Leviticus theology. And also they're crying out Genesis chapter 4, where God says after Cain kills Abel, the blood of your brother is crying out to me from the ground.
Yeah.
So it seems to be like that a little bit. And then God tells them to wait a little bit longer, which is interesting. And also in Genesis, God tells Abraham in Genesis 15, verse 16, chapter 15, verse 16, it won't be till the 4th generation till your family inherits this land because the sin of the Amorites hasn't yet come to its full yet. So you're going to have to wait a little bit here. And
yeah, that's so...
Yeah.
I don't understand that language. I see it frequently in the Bible, kind of that getting to its full, I don't even know what the right wording is for that, but it seems to talk about something, sin fully rounding itself out somehow.
Yeah.
And I'm like, does that, like, you want them to sin more? You want them to commit more atrocities before dealing with it, you know?
Yeah, honestly, it's puzzling to me. I think, though, I think that's what's going on, like, objectively. Yeah. I don't know if I understand or agree with it. But, you know, there is sort of in the psychotherapeutic context, or like addiction recovery, or like the power of confessing the worst things that you've ever done, the power of staring in the face the totality of the evil. It's part of the process. And so maybe there's an analog there.
Sure.
I don't know.
No, I'm tracking with you.
Yeah.
But it's still tough. No, I'm tracking with you.
Yeah.
And they receive, these martyrs, they receive white robes. Does that track back to anything? Is that kind of an Old Testament wink there? Why a white robe?
Yeah. So, in chapter 4 of Revelation, we saw the 24 elders were given white robes.
Yes.
And I think maybe in that episode, we talked about how when Christians were baptized, Christians were given a new white robe in the first century.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They were actually baptized in the nude, and they would come up. Yeah.
No way.
As a symbol of, sort of
rebirth,
like Garden of Eden. Yeah. Rebirth. Exactly. Yeah. They'd come up out of the water and be given a new set of white clothes.
Wow.
To signal purity.
Yeah.
They'd also be given a new name, like a baptismal name. And so white was a symbol of victory, of purity, these sorts of things.
Yep.
Yeah. And Jesus is dressed in white. In the vision in chapter 1, when John sees the exalted Jesus, he falls before him as though dead.
Yeah.
He's very white, like, but almost like it describes him as the sun.
Yeah.
And we know that white light is actually all the colors compressed.
Oh, wow.
At color theory, and I'm not super good, like, deep here, but black is actually the absence of all color. White light has latent within it all colors.
Wow.
And so I think at least Jesus is, I don't know, I like the picture of Jesus's latency of all beauty and color.
Yeah,
and stuff,
that's awesome. No, that's really cool.
Not in the Bible, just random.
Yeah. And I think just as a closing thought here about these martyrs, they're kind of, it's not just that, anybody who has experienced a tragic, untimely death is here under the altar, right? These are people who exist kind of at the epicenter, at the heart of the work that's being done in the world.
Yeah. Think about that.
This cosmic war between God and anti-God.
Right.
And they have chosen the faithful way, and yet are still longing for God to heal the world, and are, in a sense, like, it's not just the feeling of longing, but petitioning God, do the work we know you can do. God, restore.
Right.
Bring us back to right.
Right.
And I think that should be our prayer too.
You want to be martyred?
Well, I would like to remain faithful to Jesus, and what that might require, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to pretend like I'm a hero, because I know how my knees would knock if that ever came to be. But I do hope to be faithful, like the martyrs who call on Jesus in this picture.
And your insight at the beginning was so correct, that, like, they're the center of the action now. They're at the place that really, really matters. And I think Eugene Peterson talks about how he pulls from some poet about how the prayers of the saints that go up to heaven, and in chapter 5, I think it's the elders they have their harps, and then they have their bowls, which are filled with the incense, which is the saints, or the prayers of the saints of God. How our prayers are like reversed thunder. That is, they go up as very insignificant, but then once they're heard in heaven and are implemented in earth, it's poof. I mean, there's like this world-shaping influence of prayer, because we are connected to the heavenly realm. And the heavenly realm is ultimately the one in control.
Yeah.
And but it's always so important
despite appearances,
to ground that insight in the text, because then some people take that as like, I am so powerful.
Sure.
I can control the world.
Right.
But they don't think about what kind of power God exercises through the slaughtered lamb.
Yeah.
And so, any self-serving theology that we can dream of is quickly chastened through close biblical study.
Yep. And blessing doesn't frequently come through an easy path. Sometimes it's a difficult path.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's continue, and we'll close out the chapter with verses 12 through 17.
Let's do it.
As I looked, he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake, and the sun turned black like sackcloth. The whole moon became like blood, and the stars were falling from heaven onto the earth, as when a fig tree shaken by a strong wind drops its late fruit. The heaven disappeared like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. The kings of the earth, the leading courtiers, the generals, the rich, the power brokers, and everyone, slave and free, all hid themselves among the caves and rocks of the mountains. Fall on us, they were saying to the mountains and the rocks. Hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the anger of the Lamb. The great day of their anger has come. Who can stand upright?
Yeah, so this is a passage that very much rewards study of how it maps onto antecedents in the Old Testament.
Okay.
All of this imagery of earthquakes and heavenly signs and just this dramatic hiding in the caves, fall on us. Almost all of this, a pastiche of things that have already been seen in the Old Testament. The question is, to what does it refer?
Yeah.
Is this like literal astronomy?
Right.
Like, and then the Milky Way exploded, and then the galaxy, or gravity started working in reverse. And is that what's envisioned here? And based on what we were just saying a couple minutes ago about God's commitment to the
material world,
material creation, should give us some pause before we jump to the assumption that this is picturing the end of the space-time universe. Like it's not the Big Bang, it's the Big Crunch.
Right.
And
God's just going to light a match and be like,
exactly.
Let it burn. We'll get back to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Great image.
Yeah.
Rather, when the Old Testament talks about this kind of stuff, often in context, it's talking about the horrors of being conquered by another nation and exile, and the temple, which itself was like a microcosm. The temple was like the universe in miniature.
Yeah.
And when the temple went down, it was as if the architecture of being was shattered, And so the only way you could speak about this is in cosmic language.
Yeah.
And we do this too. When we talk about major events, COVID was an earth-shattering event.
Yes.
September 11th just rocked the world.
Yes.
Well, actually, no, the world just kept on right on its axis just fine, actually, and we're still a sphere and nothing has exploded.
Sure.
But certain things that we could call geopolitical, social events are of such magnitude that we can only describe them with this sort of language.
Yep.
And so this is really key in understanding a book like Revelation and biblical prophecy writ large, but Revelation is how the best scholars that I've read, and far beyond, Tom Wright is a wonderful point of reference because he has the rare gift of being able to translate scholarly
things into
complexity.
Regular people speak.
Well, that's he was a pastor, he was a bishop, anyways, amazing guy. But this all doesn't hang on Tom Wright.
Yeah,
This is very large, very well developed schools of thought to understand how did language work in Jewish and Greco-Roman antiquity.
Right.
And these types of images, ways of speaking, did refer to events in the real world. But they didn't envision necessarily, or they didn't envision a sort of like raw empirical collapse. Otherwise, why would the people, if everything was really exploding, the world was ripping apart, why would you go hide in a cave anyways? That's going to help. So what it's talking about is such a shaking where even the powerful, even the people who run the world are saying, wow, our own finitude and frailty has been forcibly revealed to us, and there's nothing we can do. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? How does that land with you,
it lands well. I think that's a great explanation. I also think that it's worth noting that they realize they're not just a afraid, but they realize they're at the Lamb's mercy.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're taken out of themselves, out of their own power and prestige,
Mm-hmm.
and not just to, in general, and upset about what just happened with the world. Like, oh, the world is falling apart. I'm so sad and upset. It's like, oh, my realization is actually pointed towards the fact that like, I am at the mercy of the God of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
I am not the one in control.
Mm-hmm.
My life does not belong to me.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in some way fundamentally what happens to anyone who comes to the realization that we need the healing that Jesus offers. It's not just like this, and I'm specifically talking about when someone comes to Christ, like it's this realization, like my life is not my own.
Mm-hmm.
I can either take God's hand and receive,
Mm-hmm.
or I can reject.
Mm-hmm.
But the relationship that I need to care about right now is between me and him. It's
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
between me and the powers that be out there or nature or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Like of all the things for their minds to turn to
Mm-hmm.
or for their attention to be brought to after earth-shattering events, it's me and God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
to me, that's like really stark.
Yeah.
It's really important that
Mhm.
that is what the world revolves around. Humanity and creation writ large, not just, I think that's kind of a human-centric thing, but like all
Mhm.
of creation either turning back to God or saying no.
Yeah. And, I think that glimmers of that realization are even in secular culture.
Mhm.
I'm reading right now a classic 20th century book, Tom Wolfe's The Bonfire of the Vanities.
Oh, I've never heard of it.
And think about that phrase, a great phrase,
Yeah.
Bonfire of the Vanities.
Nice.
And it's about, I think it's 1980s New York City. And the main characters are like a big shot lawyer, a big shot stockbroker, and a big
Mhm.
shot journalist. And they all think they're a big deal. But they also their whole inner world is a freaking disaster.
Mm.
And they're all, I mean, I'm only halfway through it right now, but it seems to be he's narrating the bonfire, the ridiculous nature of the things that we hold up as prestigious and of, well, I'm in control. And, he calls himself the main guy. His name is Sherman McCloy, I think. He calls himself
What a name.
The master of the universe. I am a bond broker on the 54th floor of Pierce & Pierce. And
Nice.
I am a master of the universe.
Sure.
I move millions of dollars with a mouse click. And yet his life is just a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a similar insight when our pretensions of power are exposed for the pitiful.
Yes. Yes. And then we have a choice. Yes. But they have to be exposed first.
Yeah. But, to go back to what you said, they're terrified before the Lamb. That's oxymoronic.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up because I need clarity.
Yeah.
Why the anger of the lamb? So first,
Well, that
this
doesn't sound
little
very
lamb
scary.
that's been slaughtered. That's not. Yeah, it doesn't seem very intimidating.
Right. We have, you know her, I won't say her name.
Okay.
But in our Spanish congregation, we have a very gifted preacher.
Oh yes, we do.
This woman has a preaching gift, and
for sure.
she's a powerful preacher.
Mm-hmm.
And yet she calls herself Pastor Chihuahua.
Yep.
Why? Because she says, Pastor Ryan, you don't know. Before I go up there and preach, I'm so scared.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like a little Chihuahua.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared.
Mm-hmm.
But then
God unleashes her.
But
man.
when she's up there, well, you'd never know it.
I know.
Interestingly, just sidebar, but that's common that very gifted speakers get extraordinarily nervous. Cicero, in the great orator of ancient Rome, would get tremendously nervous. Tremendously nervous. And Destiny.
Yeah.
So
I resonate with it.
So yeah. What do they got? Toastmasters to help you deal with that kind of stuff.
See, I would avoid all of those things, but somehow God keeps bringing me back around.
You're a good speaker. But let's talk about the Lamb's anger.
Yes.
Because again, it's forcing us to reevaluate what we anticipate power looks like, what we anticipate wrath looks like, or what motivates wrath.
Yeah.
Is what motivates God's wrath just a sort of a disgust. God is a misanthrope. God hates humans and the world.
Just distaste.
That is a common misperception, and it's incredibly wrong. Because God is the one revealed in Jesus who, for the sake of love, lays down his life and gives himself. And so God's wrath is stern opposition to all that which refuses love, to all that which is unloving, to all that which is evil in the sense of being persistently, deliberately anti the things that God cares about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and it's not just this dialectic of power and love. It's also a dialectic of strength and weakness, because in Revelation there's all these beasts and monsters and stuff, and yet the great hero is not Bambi, but a little lamb. Very unintimidating, and yet the mystery of how strength and weakness work together is one of the things that the Bible has from go, is trying to get us to realize this deeper wisdom.
Yes, I like the way Paul uses the language of God's wisdom confounds the wise, and he just it's all the things that we never anticipate. And
what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12 is often misquoted, because it's the thorn in the flesh.
Oh, sure.
And he says, God, take it away from me. He says, no, so because of the surpassing glory of your visions and revelations, I don't want you to get arrogant. Okay. He says, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you. And then here's the misquote. My power is made perfect in weakness.
Right.
But the misquote is that in the Greek, it doesn't say my power. It just says power. It says power is perfected in weakness. And that
tracks.
That is something very deep to...
it's almost something you have to, you can't really explain it fully. You have to experience it.
Yeah.
Just to truly begin to grasp what that means. And you have to be put in a place of, you have to experience that vulnerability of weakness to really appreciate the power that comes from it when.
Yeah. There's this passage in Deuteronomy 32. Let me read it.
Yeah.
This is Moses. He's on his deathbed, and he is saying to all Israel, this is an extraordinarily important passage. We should do a whole episode on it.
I'm down.
It's been called, this passage has been called a compendium of prophetic theology. And what it means is that Moses is on his deathbed. He said, and God says, hey, just so you know, as soon as you die, they're all going to go crazy. And God says, I want you to write a song that will be a witness against them on the day they go crazy, that we knew this was going to happen all along.
Yeah.
And so he tells this narrative, and this narrative replays itself over and over in the later prophetic writings. The narrative goes this way. Israel, I found you when you were totally hopeless. I brought you to myself. I beautified you. I exalted you. And then you rebelled against me, and you broke my covenant. So I raised up against you a nation to discipline you. But then that nation got arrogant, and I disciplined that nation too. And at the end of all of this, there will be a remnant of faithful servants, and I will vindicate them. That's kind of the storyline. And towards the end, there's this line. So this is towards the end of Deuteronomy 32, verse 36. It says, for the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and there is none remaining bond or free. So the flashpoint, the moment God's like, boom, I'm going to act for you, is when he sees that their power is gone. I mean, that's Jesus being resurrected after he's dead, after the power is gone, So this is not an innovation at the very end of the Bible.
Yes.
This stuff goes all the way back to the Torah.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are echoes, not fresh beginnings. So we've talked about a lot today. There was a lot in this chapter, and it was really fun too, because I think a lot of this stuff is just so misunderstood, or really just a big fat question mark. Like, what in the world is this talking about?
I think one of the things I like is and we could try to start wrapping up, summarizing a lot of the stuff. Christians should be some of the most insightful people about evil in the world. And this chapter that we've studied today is in many ways a theodicy. Theodicy is that branch of theology that asks the question about God's justice. And the classic If God is all good and all powerful, why is there suffering? Either he must not be all good or all powerful. Is he really God? That whole question. And Annie Dillard, a writer, says tongue-in-cheek that the chief theological question of all time is, what in Sam Hill is going on here anyways? Like, you just look around the world, and the first 2 pages of the daily newspaper and the first few pages of the Bible say the same thing. This isn't how it's supposed to be. There's something like deeply wrong. And this passage squares right up to that, and how evil is. It is layered. There's social evil in war. There's ecological evil with famine. There's biological evil as our bodies decompose. All of this stuff is happening in every generation, and it doesn't give us a tidy little answer. It also doesn't say, now it's going to go away. It will ultimately go. This is where Revelation is ultimately leading. By the time we get to chapter 21, and only then, the sea was no more, which, as we've talked about, is a symbol of all those forces of chaos and opposition to God are dealt with deep, deep down. But it's not a quick solution. And in many ways, the book of Revelation is an exhortation to faithfulness, to faithful suffering, to faithful prayer, to faithful witness in the teeth of enormous forces opposed to God. And many of them will be parading themselves as virtues. Economic greed can parade itself as, just a nice standard of living. Oh, really? Because what's downstream of that? Or all sorts of chaotic personal lives are framed under the banner of love, or all the
freedom.
Yeah, exactly. So Christians should be very shrewd and not dupable by the many faces of evil. And I think that's part of what's going on in this chapter. Chapter 7, which we'll study next time, actually is kind of a little intermission, an interlude that's a little more hopeful, actually. And we need it, because right after this passage, it's like, dude, that was on blast.
Yeah.
That was evil in your face. This might sound weird, but there was a phase in my life where I thought about theology as like jelly donuts, where, just track with me, just watch me.
Hey, I'm here for it. So you got the
jelly donuts, and you can extract all the jelly, and you still have this shell. There's nothing inside of it. And for a while, like when I lost my faith in my 20s for a few years, like I was left with all these empty jelly donuts, like all these words like faith, hope, love, Jesus, salvation, heaven, all this stuff were like eviscerated. There was nothing in there.
Yeah, hollow.
But learning the Bible at a deeper, historically appropriate level has like re-injected these things. So at the end of the day, we're not talking about anything other than faith. But what we are doing is saying, what does that mean? What is the substance of it? What does it acknowledge about the world, about ourselves, about God, about history? And saying, this is actually, faith is far more substantive than I had understood before.
Right.
Yes,
totally.
But you can't get there unless you take an unblinking look into the heart of evil and the heart of the problem. And it ain't just out there. It's in here too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Even I think about when I was in high school learning about rhetorical devices and stuff like that, and how you have to kind of set up a problem before you provide a solution in order to really get the point across.
Yep.
I think that maps on here.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've heard preachers talk about people only change their lives in 2 situations: if they're on a quest, or if they're in a crisis.
Yeah.
But when people just wander into church on Sunday and their life's pretty comfortable and things are good, they're not going to change their lives.
Yeah.
So as a preacher, you have to create a rhetorical crisis.
Sure.
You have to force the issue and make them say, crap, I guess I'm not okay. I got to change my life. And so
Jesus was a master at kind of putting his finger right where it hurts, right? Yeah. Like, so he could get there so much better than I think we ever could. But it really is, you have to expose, you have to look at the thing for what it is and get to the nitty gritty of why it's a problem before we can then begin to introduce what the solution or the hope is. And until then, like, it doesn't have any teeth. You said that, like, there's no way to sink into, if you're biting into something hollow, it just kind of cracks and crumbles. But like the hope of the gospel sinks into a very real, visceral experience that every human, if they haven't faced already, will face living in this world of great evil and sin towards one another and towards ourselves and towards God. And, I think too that's a conversation that maybe not for today, but is just a reality that I think Revelation helps contribute to. Is we often just kind of talk about personal sin, you mentioned this earlier, without acknowledging the many powers that exist in resistance to God outside of just, personal sin, right? That's happening in our own, lives. But like other people, other bad characters and people living in the world interacting, and also the powers that scriptures talk about, even in Ephesians, that are these beings in opposition to God, right? Like there's a lot happening here. And if we're just about it and totally unaware, we have no idea how to appropriately frame our lives and appropriately grasp hope. So when things go wrong, good luck.
Yep. If your hope is thin, you will be disillusioned.
Yeah. Thank you. That was a much more succinct way to say exactly what I was hoping to say.
That's all right.
So yeah.
Well, let's put a pin in it there. And I am hopeful only because I've read beyond Revelation 6.
And you have permission to keep reading.
Yeah, you
don't have to wait for us.
Yeah, you don't have to wait. But thank you guys first of all, thanks for you, Destiny, for
absolutely. Thank
this
you.
great conversation. And thank you guys for joining in.
Yeah.
And I hope this was helpful. Write in with any questions you have. We'd love to respond and interact with whatever came up for you. Destiny, where would they do that? They could write a question right below the YouTube. Yes?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can leave a comment on YouTube. You can also connect with us at the email connect@deeperbiblepodcast.com.
Awesome. Yeah. So we'd love to do that. And also, if the Spirit moves you, we actually need financial support to keep this going. So you can go to our website, thedeeperbiblepodcast.com, and give a one-time gift or a recurring gift. And that's about all. Thank you so much. We are rooting for you and praying for you. And we'll see you next time on the Deeper Bible Podcast. Shalom, me homies. Take care. Bye-bye.